the next president should sign legislation
to repeal Obamacare.
repealing Obamacare.
Number one. Number two, again, staying with healthcare because those are the big drivers, is Medicaid. Back in 1996, I took to the floor of the United States Senate and through a quirk of the fact that the chairman of the Finance Committee back in 1996 had to resign, Bob Packwood. And Bob Packwood, 2 weeks after he resigned, was to bring a bill to reform welfare to the floor of the United States Senate. Well, he resigned, and the new chairman, frankly, didn't know anything about the bill that I actually worked with Bob Packwood on. And the reason I worked with him on it, because when I was in the Ways and Means Committee in the House, I actually drafted the Contract with America Welfare Reform Bill. So I knew a lot about this issue. And so I ended up managing that bill. Now, why do I talk about welfare? Because welfare was the only time in the history of this country where we ended a major federal entitlement. And what we did, we said, look, welfare is a state issue. It's something the states basically manage already. It's just a federal entitlement, and the federal government has a very prescriptive program how the state runs it. But the state runs welfare policy. And so what we said is, look, we need to end the federal entitlement. We need to give a block of money to the states. We need to pare back some of these strings attached to this money and let the states devise their own program. What happened? Welfare rolls decreased by over 50%. Poverty levels went down. People who weren't working and were chronically unemployed went back to work. Family stability increased. All positive benefits. Why do I say that? Because we need to do the exact same thing for Medicaid.
Back then, you actually had a Democratic president.
We had a Democratic president
who was ready to sign the bill.
We had to bribe him. That's the best word for it. We had to put more money in the pot, primarily for daycare. But we did. It was a matter of money, not policy. And for me, I'm willing to trade money for policy if eventually we can get the money. Which, down the road, if you can get the right policy in place, you can save the money. And I think welfare reform proved that. So on Medicaid, we need to do the same thing. We need to repeal the federal entitlement, which is a perverse incentive for the states to spend more money and turn the program back. I can go down the list. Medicare would be the next thing we'd have to deal with.
Talk about
Social Security after that.
So the state of California is going bankrupt. Right. Their legislative analyst's office in November put out a report that said they face a $20 billion deficit every year for the next 6 years, and that they're going to spend about $20 billion a year on Medi-Cal, which is their state Medicaid program. So their deficit equals their Medi-Cal program. Of their 37 million people under the 2010 census, 7 million of those are on Medi-Cal. So you would say to California, you're on your own?
I would say, here's the money. Here's a block of money. Right now, as you know, the Medicaid funds are split between the federal and state level. And this was, a perverse incentive by very smart progressives in the 1960s figured out that if we cost share with the states, let the states run the program, but we cost share with them, and we pick up a percentage of whatever the cost is, that will incentivize them to grow the program. Right. Why? Because they can get $1's worth of benefit to their constituents for 50 cents on the dollar. And so this perverse incentive to states to grow their program, and the federal government's simply on the hook for it. And California is really, New York is another one, case in point, where they dramatically expanded these programs, and the federal government's picking up 50% of the cost of it.
So Senator, you get rid of the federal entitlement. It all goes back to the states. You're giving them a block grant. Is the block grant frozen at the current
level? That's what we did with welfare. What we said is, look, we'll pretty much leave the money as it is. We didn't cut it because then you get into where do you cut and who do you cut. So we didn't cut it, and we grandfathered everybody in and said, okay, but we're not going to increase it. And so now you have to manage within this amount of money. That would be at least my initial proposal.
Now, of course, as you know, under Obamacare, Medicaid is actually going to expand because they're going to take people up to 125% of the poverty level.
It's going to explode, not expand. Right. I mean, in states like Pennsylvania, where we cover 75% of poverty. In other words, if you're at if you're at the poverty level, but only at 75%, in other words, not even everybody who's quote poor gets Medicaid in Pennsylvania. Now they're going to go up to 150% of poverty. So they're going to potentially even more than double the number of people who are going on. Now, initially they said, well, the federal government will pay for it. But of course, that's unsustainable, and everybody knows it. The state's going to end up having to pick up their portion.